All right. So they're supposed to be doing an election preview. Steve Kornacki, all the weirdos are going to be at the desk. So I wanted to watch that tonight, and I promised some people that I would air it live. So here we are, and it should be starting in a couple of minutes. I think they're actually doing some stuff already. Probably could come out a little bit early. So yeah. So if you're if you're just coming in, there's an election preview on MSNBC tonight, and I wanted to check it out. So I promised that I would air it live. So now we're doing it watch party style. It is not Tuesday, and I cannot speak to whether or not you have been drunk all week. But if you have been, I am jealous. So there's that. Anyway, I told Greg, I don't think Greg's going to be able to make it, but I did tell him I was going to send him an invite. So let's do that. Sup, Rob Houston? What's going on? Yeah. So, hey, Mom. Oh, damn. Sue, go back and watch The Mandalorian. Like that, what are you doing? It's much better than anything that's going to happen here. And check on some the latest polls that came out today. Nate Silver basically was showing of the, I think, 4 swing states: Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, and one other that I cannot remember. The averages moved by basically 0.5 for 3 of them, and nothing for Florida. So it's all still the same. I still have the an abiding suspicion that the polls are either completely correct or they're actually going to swing in favor of Biden, because a lot of Republicans are going to be voting for Trump. But I don't know. We're going to find out. Yeah, Rob just said, did you see the Trump train blocking highways and access to polling sites up in Jersey? No, not in Jersey, just down in Texas. Oy. Fuck balls is what I have to say about that. Yeah. Google that right now. So anyway, guys, if you're just showing up, sorry, I just had a total brain fart. These 3 actually are planning on doing an election preview tonight. Nicole Wallace and Steve Kornacki and Brian Williams and Rachel Maddow. And that's what I wanted to watch. And I told people that I would air it live. So here we are.
MSNBC Decision 2020 Election Night. Live from Democracy Plaza. Here now are Rachel Maddow and Brian.
Here we go.
Well, good evening, and this is it. Almost.
Wow, that's crazy, guys.
Push. The breathless suspense, the crippling anxiety should be over in just a few days. In the meantime, both campaigns, both candidates going all out on this last Sunday before Election Day, as the remainder of this race can now be measured in hours, not days. Early voting has been nothing short of colossal and record-shattering so far. 93 million Americans have cast their ballot, figure to get nudged over the 100 million mark when this weekend's final tallies are all in and complete. Brian Williams here at our NBC News Global Headquarters in New York, coming to you from our newly expanded studio facilities as these times require. And of course, we enter the home stretch of a presidential election that has tested the resilience of our democracy and the resilience of our people in ways not seen or required in modern history. In large part, of course, because we are in the midst of an uncontrolled pandemic. At the rate of 500,000 new cases per week now, the death toll now approaching 230,000 souls in our country. And I have it on good authority that somewhere in this cavernous studio complex is my friend, Rachel Maddow. Rachel, come in. I don't even know if you can see me. Can you see me waving at her?
Yes, look, here you are. You know, I tweaked my prescription, but a week ago I would not have been able to see you. Look at you, you're the size of an ant.
I'm like right next door.
God bless you, Brian. Well, you know what? Over at this end of our supersized studio, I am joined at a, what is this, wary but respectful distance by Nicole Wallace and Joy Reid, of course. It is great to be here with you. Our network's MVP, Steve Kornacki, is at the board tonight with us as well. The latest polling tonight, although we are getting close to a time where polling is almost weird, given that it is basically a prediction of what will happen, and that thing that will happen is already considerably underway. As Brian mentioned, we are closing in on nearly 100 million American votes already cast. Today, President Trump held rallies in 5 states. He will do at least another 5 tomorrow. Former Vice President Joe Biden spent the day barnstorming Pennsylvania, including a Souls to the Polls event. We are used to reporting every 4 years or sometimes every 2 years on Souls to the Polls, big early vote mobilizations, mostly by African-American churches on the last Sunday before Election Day. Souls to the Polls effort hampered this year by the pandemic, but also, if we're being honest, by Republican legislatures targeting it and trying to end Sunday early voting anywhere they can. Former Vice President Biden will be in Ohio tomorrow.
Come on now. Sorry, guys. Let me see if I can find it back up. Balls. Please hold.
See, that is a bit closer, about 7.5 points on average. Biden over Trump in the national polling right now. Of course, as we saw in 2016, this is about the Electoral College, not necessarily the popular vote. And there's been talk certainly that Trump could lose the popular vote by a significantly larger margin in 2020 and still find a path through the Electoral College. So let's look at some of the key states here. First of all, these big 3, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. These were Trump's narrowest battleground wins in 2016. These are all Democratic states going back to the 1980s that Trump flipped for the first time in 3 decades. And these are also the 3 battleground states 2 days before the election where Joe Biden has his largest leads. These are the polling averages. That's what you're looking at here for these 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Also, some other late polling to tell you about here from critical states coming out today. There's this from Florida, an ABC Washington Post poll. This a must-win state for the president. He leads in this poll at least by 2 points. Also from Iowa, a smaller state, but one that moved dramatically toward Trump in 2016. This showing late movement, or at least suggesting late movement in Iowa, a 7-point lead for Trump. He has not done that well in any Iowa polling we've seen this fall. That's a Des Moines Register poll. Let's just show you what this would mean when it comes to that battle for 270, just to give you a sense of this map 2 days before the election. If this polling we're seeing, we're just showing you is onto something. Let's say, for instance, Iowa. If Trump were to get Iowa, that's obviously a small gain for him in the Electoral College there. Demographically, though, you're talking about blue-collar, rural, white voters, Midwest. How about Ohio? That's another state that, like Iowa, swung dramatically toward Trump in 2016. If, and this is a big if, but if there is that late movement in Iowa, that polling is suggesting, could that be happening in Ohio too, enough to give that to the president? Let's just put that red right now to give you a sense of the scenarios. And then let's also say, what if that late polling in Florida is right there, that ABC Washington Post poll, and Trump gets Florida? So if that happens, what are the implications for the Electoral College map? Well, again, the first place that you look are these three: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And we just showed you the numbers there. And the president has to win one of these states, because if he doesn't, Biden gets all three, Biden goes over 270. So the first thing is, you look at these three states, Trump's got to find a win. Pennsylvania's the biggest. Pennsylvania's the closest. The Trump campaign talks a lot about Pennsylvania. Let's say Trump gets it. It is essentially a must-win state for him. What else then? Well, Trump would also have to sweep the Southeast. If he got Florida, he still has to worry about North Carolina and Georgia. He has different demographic challenges in North Carolina and Georgia than he does in Florida. It is not automatic that if Donald Trump wins Florida, he's going to get North Carolina, he's going to get Georgia. That won't automatically happen. But for Trump to get to 270, he has to make that happen. He has to get those states. He obviously has to get Texas. And if he were to do that, that's a lot here. Get Pennsylvania, get these two winnable Midwest states, sweep the South and the Southeast. Then you'd be talking about potentially a race coming down. Would it be Arizona? Oh, keep in mind, too, there is this congressional district in Nebraska that Democrats are very optimistic about. And under this scenario, if Biden were to get Arizona, then even after not flipping any of these states in the South, that would still be enough for Biden. Or if Trump were to get it in that scenario, Trump might get over 270. So you get a sense of the challenge the president faces here. He's running against the odds here in the Midwest. He's got to win one of these states. He's got to sweep all of these states we just went through here. And then you get out to Arizona. He's been trailing in the polling in Arizona. He'd have to have late momentum there as well. That is what it would take to get him over 270.
Steve Kornacki, when you look at the polling, not just in terms of absolute values, but in terms of the quality of the various polls that are being done, I'm starting to think about this because that Iowa poll in 2016, which also said at this time in 2016 that Trump was up 7, and it surprised people. He ended up winning Iowa by 9. People saw that as a great indicator of this shift that wasn't otherwise being picked up on by other pollsters in terms of the Midwest. When you look at the polling that's out there and you look at the map and you look at how the campaigns are doing, is there a state that you are keeping an eye on that might be a source of surprise? That might be something where the polling necessarily shouldn't be expected to be predictive, or where you think there might be late shifts that wouldn't be picked up in the polling we've seen so far?
Yeah, there is one state, because we just ran through this scenario where we say, hey, if a bunch of things all broke Trump's way, he could make this sort of come down to Arizona. And we mentioned that Trump trails in the Arizona polling. And so let's say he didn't get Arizona. I will tell you, there is one state that went blue in 2016 that the Trump folks have talked about for 2020 that I think got to keep an eye on election night, and that is the state of Nevada. And I say that because this is a state where there's a trend here now going back a few elections in the Republican direction. It's a state Trump narrowly missed in 2016, about 2.5 points. It's a state with a lot of, you talk about Trump's base, this sort of blue-collar, rural white voters. Demographically, there's a lot of that in Nevada. And I think, again, if you talk about, Iowa and Nevada are very different states, but if there's rural, blue-collar, white votes surging to Trump at the end, that's a huge if. That's a huge if. But if there is, keep an eye on Nevada. And again, the Electoral College implications of that potentially in a scenario like this, it could replace Arizona for Trump. So I would keep an eye on Nevada.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Steve, thanks. I'm not sure we've done anything to allay anxiety, which may be a pharmacological matter at this point, and not anything our coverage can offer. The president, as we said, about to hold his 4th rally of the day, this one in Rome, Georgia, just minutes from now. That is where we find NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson. Also with us, Our own Ali Velshi is covering the Biden campaign in Philly tonight. Ali, you start things off.
All right, we are at City Center, Philadelphia, which is where I'm going to be all the way through the election. You can see a lot of police behind me, a lot of National Guard around me. That's for a couple of reasons. This is one of those cities that has been preparing for unrest, not necessarily anticipating it, but preparing for unrest. It was a city that saw a lot of unrest in the protests after George Floyd. But as you know, we also had the killing of a man in West Philadelphia on Monday, and that has resulted in some unrest in this city as well. But as Steve was saying, this thing's going to come down to Pennsylvania. We are all going to be talking a lot on Tuesday night and quite possibly Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night, because there are some ballots in Pennsylvania that are not going to be counted until Friday. You got a story of two populations in the state. You got people in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, the urban centers. They are going to vote overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. They always vote Democratic. The issue is how many of those people will come out. Will the strong Biden supporters, will they eclipse the Hillary Clinton numbers in 2016? Will this look more like the turnout for Barack Obama before that? Will they eclipse the Trump supporters, the blue-collar, non-college educated voters that Steve was just talking about? So Pennsylvania is full of that, right? We've got the cities, we've got the collar counties around Philadelphia, the suburbs where Trump's been talking to white suburban women. These are going to go largely, they're going to break for Joe Biden. That's the expectation, that they're going to be Democratic. But Donald Trump has for the last couple of weeks been going on about this fracking idea. He's misrepresented Joe Biden's position here, but in western Pennsylvania, I was in Luzerne County yesterday, with points west of that toward the western end of the state. Fracking is a really, really big deal, and we've seen some late-breaking polling that suggests Donald Trump may be narrowing the gap there. Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have been in Pennsylvania a lot, and they're going to be. Joe Biden was just here today. Listen to what he said.
We have a president who's given up. I'll never give up, nor will America give up. We'll never wave the flag of surrender. We're going to beat this virus. We're going to get it under control. The truth is, to beat the virus, we first got to beat Donald Trump. He's the virus.
All right, this is a state where there's a lot of court cases about mail-in ballots. There is a ruling that says ballots that arrive that are postmarked by Election Day and arrive by Friday can be counted on Friday. So if it is close here, and remember, Donald Trump won here in 2016 by 44,000 votes, 0.7%. If it's close here, we might not have a final decision until Friday. Brian?
Ali Velshi, Center City, Philadelphia, great place to be even during an election year. Ali, thank you very much. To Priscilla Thompson, Rome, Georgia, covering the president's long day's journey in tonight. Priscilla?
Well, Brian, you can tell a lot about a campaign based on where the candidate is spending their time. And the fact that Donald Trump is about to touch down in Georgia this close to an election is certainly sending a message. Donald Trump has campaigned in this state 3 times since late September. And to put this into context, in 2016, after he became the Republican nominee, Donald Trump did not campaign in the state a single time, and he still won it by 5 points. And so that is what we're looking at on the ground here in Georgia. A string of recent polls out of this state show a very tight race, with Joe Biden either tied with the president or beating him, although within the margin of error. And this is a state that has not voted for a Democrat for president since the early 90s. And I talked to some of the Trump supporters who are here today, who waited in line for hours in the cold to hear the president speak tonight. And I asked them, what do you make of those poll numbers? And folks here tell me that there is a silent majority of Trump supporters on the ground that are not being counted and reflected in those polls. And I should point out, we're in Northwest Georgia. This is a conservative bastion, but the picture looks far differently if you talk to voters in those suburbs outside of Atlanta. Brian?
Priscilla, thank you for that. Always fascinated at campaign playlists this time of year. For those of you who recognize the unmistakable voice of Michael Stipe in the background, that is indeed the REM classic, Everybody Hurts. Interesting choice at a rally during an uncontrolled pandemic. With that, Rachel, over to you.
Also, I was just Googling the lyrics while we were just hearing that at the end. But yes, it's dark. But also, like, countdown 3, 2, 1 to REM suing him to stop him from playing it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I have no inside information on the subject. The two campaigns are each competing to win in all the same swing states, of course. But boy, howdy, are they approaching it differently. Republican efforts this year to limit the counting of likely Democratic ballots, to limit the counting of ballots broadly in the expectation that the smaller the vote is, the better Republicans do. Republicans time more in efforts to make it difficult to vote for all those same reasons. Those perennial Republican political and legal strategies seem to have a new counterpart this year in the era of Trump, which is, I struggle with exactly how to describe this, but I think the best phrase I can come up with is these physical shows of force by Trump supporters, which we have seen episodically over the late stages of the campaign. But now we have had a big rush of them in this final weekend. Our colleague Chris Hayes joins us now to talk about what that has looked like around the country in these final hours of the campaign. Hey, Chris.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Great to see you. I think at this point, it's fair to say the Trump campaign has run out of people to persuade. There's 100 million votes banked, election day on Tuesday. So there's not a lot of persuasion happening, right? So typically at this point in the campaign, both sides need turnout. But the Trump campaign has another set of tactics that they've employed along with the GOP and the RNC, which is intimidation, suppression, and litigation. So what you have is the president, for instance, celebrating this really harrowing, dangerous display Brian mentioned earlier. It's a bunch of his supporters on a highway in Texas who got in their cars, slowed down a Biden campaign bus that was traveling through Texas on the highway, sometimes to just 20 miles an hour. If you've been behind the car with someone doing that, you know that's really, really unnerving. The video of the incident we're playing now shows one of the Trump supporters colliding with another vehicle, attempting to sort of bump into it, it would appear, and that vehicle reportedly being driven by a Biden campaign staffer. 911 was called by people inside the bus, and tonight, the FBI has confirmed to NBC News it is investigating that incident. Then last night, the president tweets out a video of that incident, adding, "I love Texas." Immediately after the bus was surrounded, the Biden campaign canceled several events in Texas because of safety concerns. Think about that for a second. And that was not the last of those. Then today, another Democratic event in Georgia was canceled around Rome, where the president is tonight. The Floyd County Democratic Party writing on their site, quote, "We have been informed that a large militia presence is expected in Rome today due to Trump's visit. Additionally, we are not able to secure police presence for our event because of the airport rally." So we've already had a sort of remarkably smooth, I would say, early voting period in which, you know, you have a record 93 million Americans who cast their votes. And we should note this because I think it's important people hear this as they're thinking about Election Day and their decisions. It has gone on largely without incident. There's been lines and there's been some headaches for sure. And that should be the baseline expectation for everyone for the vast majority of Election Day. There is, however, this effort by the Trump campaign to recruit poll watchers. But the incident on the Texas highway, Trump supporters trying to yell and scare people near polls, that is a real threat to the administration of free and fair elections. And hopefully that will not be and has not been what the vast majority of Americans have experiencing as they vote. There is, of course, as you mentioned, also one other effort by the Trump campaign to influence the election. That, of course, the mass litigation effort, which reaches new heights of absurdity every day. The most egregious, I mean, really jaw-dropping piece of legislation, an anti-democratic lawsuit in Texas, where Republicans, as Brian mentioned, want to just throw out, just discord, light on fire, the legally cast ballots of over 126,000 people in Harris County. And those votes were cast in drive-through voting facilities set up because the pandemic is raging through this country. The county says those drive-throughs were approved by the Texas Secretary of State's office and local officials because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And none of those voters did a single thing wrong. And we should note, they're Republicans too. 127,000 votes in Harris County. Republicans, Democrats, independents, who knows? Republicans, though, think those ballots skew Democratic, and so they want them, along with any legitimate Republican votes in there, just voided. Luckily, today, the Texas State Supreme Court swiftly rejected that effort. There's still a case before federal court, which should not have much of a chance, but we will see. But this is now the closing strategy of Trump and the Republican Party, and Trump's been very forthright about the courts and litigation as a kind of desperate Hail Mary as the clock runs down.
Intimidation, suppression, and litigation. I feel like you and I, for years, have covered the litigation part of it and a little bit of the suppression part of it, because we've been able to document and report on that over the course of our careers in broadcasting. But the intimidation stuff kicking up in this way, that seems to be sort of rolling down a hill now, feels like we're covering some other country. My friend Chris, thank you so much. I want to turn now to my colleagues, Joy Reid and Nicole Wallace, here with me in the studio. When we look at the lay of the land numbers-wise from Steve Kornacki, when we hear Chris talk about how President Trump is going about trying to win this election, you see how these two candidates are doing. Nicole, I know you were saying the president just tweeted about the FBI investigating
While
the Texas
Chris Hayes
situation.
was talking at 8:18 p.m. Eastern, Trump tweeted that the people under investigation now by his own FBI are patriots who did nothing wrong. So again, I think one of the
So
big
he's telling the FBI what to conclude
correct,
in that investigation.
prejudging an investigation that's now being undertaken by the executive branch he leads. I think that what's so interesting, though, I mean, look, here's the thing about being on presidential campaigns by the Sunday night. No one knows jack squat. And the reason it's so easy to get all your sources to call you back is because no one knows who knows something. So everybody calls you back. And then someone calls you back when you're still on the phone with the other person that calls you back, but they don't know anything. They just want to know what the next person calling you. They say, oh, well, pick him up and call me back after. No one knows anything. Both campaigns have internal tracks. And I have the sense from talking to
Wait, say what internal tracks are.
So internal tracks are the overnight polls. They're like ratings for presidential campaigns. They're really targeted, and each campaign kind of knows where their vote is better than any news organization.
And they're private. These are not publicly available.
They're private. The Trump folks, who knows who does them, right? But 4 years ago, I had heard what their tracks were, and they had the campaign doing very well in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, some of the places where they did well. So now their tracks have this outsized import in my mind. The important, and then the Biden team oddly feels more optimistic about North Carolina and Georgia than they do Florida. So I have a sense that both campaigns, overnight tracks, see Florida really tight.
Yeah.
I'll say this, though. Even the rosiest data coming to the Trump campaign doesn't get Trump to 270. So I think the reason you're seeing all these tactics, the reason you're seeing this reporting in Axios that the president, I think, is now knocked down about court cases is that even the rosiest sort of polling that the Trump campaign does where they think they can find their voters better than anyone doesn't get him over.
So the Pennsylvania, Wisconsin that they had based on their tracking in 2016, do we know? Are your sources telling you anything about that for 2020? I don't think the Trump
look, I didn't see their overnight tracks, but I do not think the Trump campaign sees themselves ahead of Joe Biden right now in those three states.
And if they were confident, I think that tracks with, first of all, Republicans that I talked to in Florida feel better than Democrats that I talked to in Florida. I will say that even Republicans who are not big fans of Trump, they look at the fact that the turnout among pro-Trump leaning Hispanics is higher than the turnout among Biden-leading Hispanics, and that you're also seeing weak turnout, particularly in very heavily Black precincts in South Florida. Places like Miami-Dade are underperforming right now, and so Democrats that I talk to down there are saying they're really now leaning into Election Day. Because there are polls out there. I think Jonathan Martin has one out that talks about like 30% of Black voters in that state, but also really up to 40% overall of Black voters not trusting the system, worried about the mail, and planning to vote on Election Day.
And worried about early in-person voting, too. They want to vote on the day.
They want to vote on the day. And by the way, for African-American voters, voting on Election Day is actually a thing. Like a lot of voters, like my mom, there's a whole sort of magic to the get dressed up,
ritual.
Go take your kids. And there was a ritual to voting on Election Day. And African-American and Latino voters tend to be late voters. They tend to vote on Election Day or souls to the polls Sunday. So it'll be interesting to see what happened today. Because in Florida, this was souls to the polls Sunday, and I have a friend that was working souls to the polls. So I think, the warlordism that you're seeing out of Trump people tells me that they don't feel good. Because if you're blocking New Jersey highways and you're in Texas trying to block people from getting down the street, that's not a winning move. That's a straight intimidation move. It's a bullying move.
It's a desperate move.
And it's desperate. And it's also, and this is also what I'm hearing from a lot, it's pissing people off, particularly voters of color. It's motivating people to want to vote more. I definitely heard that out of a former elected official friend in Georgia, that Black voters in Georgia see all of this, and it's all John Lewis style, good trouble motivation.
All right, we've got much more ahead here tonight. It's going to be a busy few hours here tonight. Coming up right on the other side of the break, we've got a live report from North Carolina where there's been some real drama over the last couple of days. Stay with us.
Really curious to see what's going on in North Carolina. Couple articles I read a couple weeks ago. Before I get into that, Dave, you're right. I was salty, so I drank a bunch of water, which would make me less salty because fucking chemistry. Anyway, Wall Street is apparently looking at North Carolina, which is supposed to, and we'll see what Rachel's going to say here, but it's supposed to be getting data basically right after the polls close. Like they've been pre-counting all of the mail-in ballots. They've got all their, they basically have their ducks in a row or whatever. So like from that, Wall Street people were saying they were going to potentially be trading off of that because basically like the data that's going to come out of North Carolina is going to say, are the polls actually accurate or what? Like we're basically going to get some information that will allow us to kind of deduce whether we're going to maybe find out on election night or whether this is going to be a long drawn out process. Blah, 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 blah. It's super exciting. Yeah, in getting impeached for inciting violence, I don't know that that's an exact law, but if we have the Senate, I don't think it's going to matter. The guy's an actual criminal. I think we can impeach him just on that and be fine. That's the thing. If he manages to steal the election, he'd better fucking try and steal the Senate too. Otherwise, he's fucked. Yeah, I totally agree. Dave just said fucking ridiculous that Pennsylvania is going to take so long to start counting. Now, dummies. Yeah, I mean, and PA is sort of it's the anchor for the entire Trump strategy, right? If it looks like you're winning, night of, well, just say that all those things are illegal. And Kavanaugh fucking came out and just said it. He just said, we definitely don't want to be counting anything after Election Day because, that's just going to make people feel like the election got stolen by checks notes, counting the votes. That's how. So that's fun. And of course, I think the Republican legislature there set this up on purpose. So what are you gonna do? Yeah, right. Yeah, states need to adjust laws. I mean, this is like if you look at HR1, if you look at the Voting Rights Act in HR1 from Congress this cycle, after 2018, it addresses most of this in a way that puts everything under the oversight of the federal government, and so you just can't do this shit anymore. It's basically like the way the Civil Rights Act initially was targeted to counties that were terrible. This is just like, well, maybe we'll just do it for literally everybody. So, yes. Yeah, I actually hadn't seen. Sue just said that's the first time I've seen the video of that truck bumping into the other car. Oh my God, what is wrong with those people? Well, they're Trump supporters. And again, like the stochastic terrorism thing has been going on for a hot minute, right? Like this is not new. It's been a wink and a nod to all this stuff for months now. So that's fun. Yeah, this is what I was saying. Dave said it more succinctly than I did. Here's hopefulness. And from Dave, that counts for like 20 times more hopefulness. And of course, everybody noticed that I'm a little salty. I can use some fucking hopefulness. Because, yeah, like the data is great. It really is. But, I mean, you can't account for stealing it. Anyway, Dave said, here's hopefulness if he wins the re-election, but we win the House and the Senate, which looks pretty likely it is. He can actually be impeached and removed. $100.
Be heard through their vote this election.
Kamala Harris in North Carolina late today, where early voting ended late today. Donald Trump was also in North Carolina today. He held his third rally of the day in Hickory. Over 4 million North Carolinians have voted early, either by mail or in person. In Graham, North Carolina yesterday in Alamance County, a peaceful march and rally to get out the vote led to a standoff and confrontation with local police. Officials say organizers did not have a permit to block roadways, failed to heed a 5-minute dispersal order. Police then unleashed pepper spray while telling the crowd to leave the area, and they did so on adults and children. NBC News reporting at least 8 people were arrested. Tremaine Lee is with us right now with more tonight from Raleigh, North Carolina. Tremaine, since Joy was the first to invoke John Lewis, I'm tempted to say the more things change, the more they remain the same. And like pepper spray, imagery is really powerful stuff, especially right now.
That's right. When you see those scenes, it's that kind of old school voter intimidation and harassment. But this is a state with a long history of voter suppression and voter intimidation. Let's not forget, in recent years, the Supreme Court said that the state had acted with surgical precision aimed at disenfranchising black voters. And so while in this state, they're enjoying record levels of early voting, 95% of votes cast of all of 2016. Black folks who mail in their ballots are 4 times more likely to have those ballots rejected than whites, right? And so for more context in terms of not just the suppression, but voter turnout also, in 2016, Donald Trump won this state by 173,000 votes, right? But 170,000 black voters who voted in 2012 did not show up for 2016. And so while we see with the incident in Graham, right, that kind of physical, old school voter intimidation, then you have the shaving off of a few ballots here and some intimidation there. And we see all across the state this effort to get black folks off of the sidelines and back in the game. They're met with hurdle after hurdle, but none of this is new. But you talk about, Joy mentioned that good trouble. Black voters I've talked to all across the country who said in 2016 they felt they didn't have a dog in the fight. They didn't like Hillary Clinton. You know, they didn't want to choose between 2 evils, as they said. They said after 4 years of the winking and nodding at white supremacists, of all the violence, of Donald Trump being Donald Trump, it's time for a change. And so these techniques, these tactics that we've seen time and again, that old playbook, it seems to be invigorating so many voters here on the ground.
As you said, sadly, none of this is new. Our friend Tremaine Lee down in Raleigh tonight. Thanks.
As Democrats learned in 2008 and 2012 when they won, and then in 2016 when they did not win, one of the most important factors in the outcome of a presidential election in this country is voter turnout among African Americans specifically. Let's go back to Steve Kornacki now. Steve, what do we know now about where African American voter turnout stands so far this year? It's a year like no other in terms of all the early vote and all the vote by mail. But what can we tell from the numbers that we do have?
Yeah, it is tough to tell right now because I think a lot of this is to be determined. You mentioned souls to the polls today and Election Day, but we can certainly show you. You're talking about North Carolina with Tremaine. Here's a stat. Barack Obama, of course, carried the state in 2008, narrowly missed in 2012, and then Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. The black voter turnout rate in 2012, when Barack Obama nearly won North Carolina, was 75%. When Hillary Clinton lost by 3.5 points, it fell to 66%. So that's one thing in North Carolina for Joe Biden to have a chance here. They want to get back up, Democrats do, to that 75% level. And then where else can the black vote potentially make a huge difference for Democrats on Election Day? 3 states in particular. Georgia, we're talking about the polls being very close in Georgia. The Atlanta metro area, there is a fast-growing, increasingly diverse population in that area where Democrats have been getting bigger and bigger margins. It was almost enough for Stacey Abrams 2 years ago. Joe Biden hopes it's enough for him. And then the other 2 states here, Wisconsin and Michigan. And again, the margins here statewide, it was 11,000 votes in the entire state of Michigan in 2016. That was Donald Trump's winning margin. Democrats think they can do a lot better in Detroit in particular, especially with black voters. And in Wisconsin, the black voter turnout rate fell between 2012 and 2016, by double digits. And again, the winning margin for Trump in Wisconsin was just 23,000 votes. If you can get Democrats back to that turnout level that they got in 2012, 2008, that alone could flip Wisconsin.
And Steve, Joy was saying that anecdotally, what she's hearing from people in Florida is that they're worried on the Democratic side about black voter turnout in Florida, specifically in South Florida. I've been hearing that anecdotally as well. Is there support for that in the numbers that we do have?
There is, although, again, like I caution with all of the early voting data, there is the question here of how much is Florida, especially you talk about souls to the polls, potentially changing the numbers you're going to see in the early voting. And then again, the question of same day folks who turn out on Election Day who are not accounted for in the data yet versus what you're seeing in the early vote.
Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. Let's bring into the conversation now the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, the founder of the National Action Network. Rev, it is great to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
We're talking about the all-important African-American vote, and we're talking about, as Steve was doing, circling individual states on the map, looking at individual parts of those states where the black voter turnout is going to be determinative of that state and likely of the election. And part of me is, inspired and excited and moved by that. And part of me feels like that's a bullseye in terms of the sort of intimidation that we're seeing, the suppression efforts that we're seeing, the litigation we're already seeing threatened by the president today. If I feel like black voters have had have had to go through it, have had to go through the wars for voting, and for them to be critical up against an opponent, most of them are going to vote for Trump's opponent, for them to be up against it with a campaign who's planning on contesting it this way, it feels like a lot of dry tinder to me.
I think that the real challenge is that we vote late and we don't trust mailing. We don't really do a lot of early voting, particularly in some of the states that we're talking about. And I think that if we underestimate the passion that a lot of blacks feel in terms of what has happened this year with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. Now we're reminded with Wallace being killed just last week with a mentally challenged shooting to death in Pennsylvania, which is critical. I think that there are all the elements there for a big turnout. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were smart. They released today the photo of the meeting with George Floyd's family and Attorney Crump and I before the funeral, and showing he's been involved in these issues, contrasting Donald Trump, who's running law and order. So I believe that there are not the real efforts of suppression that we can see a large vote come out. And they have to prepare the voters, though, that they're going to try to put impediments in your way, and you must be more determined. You must not leave the polls. That's their challenge, and not have the distractions. I mean, Rachel, when you see them go get rappers who never stood up for any issue at all, it's all right to be a rapper, and many rappers have been socially involved, but the rappers that Donald Trump rolled out hasn't stood up for Trayvon or George Floyd. They all of a sudden discover politics with Donald Trump. So that's not going to work. We may be many things. Stupid is not one of them. But I think that you've got to prepare people that they're going to try impediments like we saw in North Carolina.
And Rev, I want to dig into that a little bit more. I mean, even in my neighborhood, I live in the suburbs of D.C., and it is a very Biden-y neighborhood. It's heavily black. It's heavily Southeast Asian and white. It's very mixed, but it's heavily black. And there were Trump caravans, 2 blocks from my house. There's no reason to bring a Trump caravan to that area. There's no Trump voters hardly there. It felt like intimidation. We're seeing what happened in North Carolina, where police pepper sprayed little kids that were kneeling in front of the courthouse. The aggression by police against voters who were mixing in a vote to the polls, but also another case of police brutality, and obviously what happened in Philly with Walter Wallace. I wonder if you think that the dynamic of intimidation, as you're hearing, is motivating. I'm hearing fears that these marches and what people are seeing might actually hurt Biden with white voters who see that on TV and go, oh, that's going to send me toward Trump. And I'm also hearing, anxiety about that, but I'm also hearing other people who are just angry when they see it and much more determined to vote. What are you hearing?
I've talked to people that work with National Action Network in North Carolina and, of course, Philly today because of Wallace. And I'm hearing that a lot of people are angry that maybe were not angry and passionate, and it's driving them to come out. I've always said to politicians that blacks vote in big numbers when they're proud, i.e. Barack Obama, or they're angry. And both of them drive big turnouts. Well, we have some pride in Kamala Harris, but we have a lot of anger. And I think what has happened with North Carolina happening, it triggers back in our mind 8 minutes, 41 seconds, George Floyd, yeah, we need to go vote about it. And I'll only say to people that the looting and the violence is what helps Trump. Everybody that throws a brick is pulling a lever for Trump because he can then play on law and order. But when you're tear gassing or pepper spraying nonviolent protesters, you're not helping Trump at all. I think you are energizing a lot of blacks to come out and vote against him.
The Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation on MSNBC, the founder of the National Action Network. Rev, it's great to have you here with us, my friend. Thank you. I will say, seeing Tish James do an interview this weekend on MSNBC, the New York State Attorney General. My parents, avid MSNBC viewers, that came over to see me and Susan do some Halloween stuff on Saturday, and they said, "This Letitia James, you know what she said?" Do you know what she said? And I said, "She says a lot of great stuff." And said, "No." She said, "If you are in line and somebody's trying to intimidate you or get you out of that line or wear you down, you stay there with dignity and defiance." My mother must have said dignity and defiance 17 times over the course of the night. My mother is a Canadian emigre who lives in California. She is not the person who's the bullseye for this stuff, but everybody in the country is worried about it. You know what I mean?
And you know what I am the most haunted by of everything we've sat here together and covered, the two conventions, the bizarro debates, Barack Obama's event in Philadelphia that was not supposed to have any press coverage. We were the pool. It was available to everyone. It was a teeny tiny event with African-American men, and he spoke as a community organizer. We dipped into it. I was so haunted by it. He's begging them to vote, to not give up on the country. It was reminiscent of Doc Rivers after all the brutality and violence this summer. And to have a window into the hellscape that is, you're still believing enough in our politics to participate at all. And then to go out and try to participate and be harassed and be intimidated and be brutalized in your neighborhood is a scar and a scab on this country right now in real time.
And you have to remember that, you know, there's a lot of stories about the rappers who are coming out for Trump and the fear that you're going to have, you know, sort of a wave of black male voters going toward Donald Trump. We just need to be realistic here. The vast majority of black men who vote and come out to vote are going to vote for Joe Biden. There is a small percentage of African-American men, of Latino men. There are Latino men in the Proud Boys. There are men for whom the patriarchy has an attraction. And that, you know, I think it was Bree Newsom who said, not every man of color wants to get rid of the patriarchy. Some just want a piece of it. And there are men of color who voted against Hillary Clinton, did not like the idea of having a woman president, did not like, you know, still had the same memes about her that white men had. And there are black working class men who identify even with some of the anti-immigrant positions there. So they're going to be, but just let's be realistic here. Donald Trump has no shot at getting a significant share of black male voters. I'm going to defend black men on this one. The vast majority, there are going to be a few in the neighborhood. I can tell you, I don't know a single black man who is going to vote for Trump. And if they did, who would tell any of us about it? Because they will not be at the cookout. They can't even be in the car and get a plate at the cookout in the car if they vote for him. And they know that. So even if they vote for him, they're not going to tell their mamas. Promise.
All right. There is one state whose name we repeat like a creepy incantation come Election Day. We have a live report from Florida. In just a moment. Stay with us.
Oh, yeah. Sup, Rev? Last we looked at the Pasco polls. I mean, it's tightening. If we win Pasco, I'll bake every one of you guys a cake. I don't see it happening. I mean, I hope springs eternal. There's a lot of really, really amazing people that are running as Democrats in the county. You know, Dan and Nino, and we just had Jess Stempian on. She's amazing. Brandy Coed is running, yada yada yada. Right. So like, you know, there are people on the ground really, really trying to do the work, running as Democrats, and I'm kind of hoping for you know, an upward swing on that, and we'll see, right? Like, you know, if the quote unquote suburban vote is swinging as hard for Biden as sort of preliminary data and polling data is suggesting, then I mean, we could be in for a pleasant surprise in Pasco. But I mean, you guys live there, you know that there's a lot of Trump noise in Pasco. Let's put it that way, and it's tough to kind of see past that to being hopeful. Yeah, Florida can suck it. Like, seriously. I'm not super excited about anything. And this is what's really weird, right? Like, it's like the you know, turnout, the pre-turnout numbers, you know, we might be good there, yada yada yada. yeah, Ginny nailed it. I just want Trump to win Pasco less than he won in 16, and I think that's inevitable, right? I think that is going to happen. But I'm actually way more excited about Texas, mainly because like the turnout numbers in Texas are fucking crazy. They're crazy. Like Florida can't touch any of that at all. And the turnout map that we saw, the heat map, that showed that the turnout was 110% of total turnout for the 2016 race has already happened in Harris County, and Harris County skews Democratic by like 20 points or some crazy shit, right? So racking up numbers in the major population centers in Texas, is what Beto did to improve on Hillary Clinton's numbers by a lot. We've got a shot there. It's interesting. Yeah, Rev said actually we live in Myrtle Beach. Cesspool us. I'm actually down in Miami, where the numbers that we're posting down here are apparently not stellar either, which is super frustrating. Especially after being a hotspot for COVID for so long. It's amazing to me that anyone can look at what's going on with this administration and not see right through it. But the lying works for some people, maybe for just whatever it is, like that. If you barely like brush up against politics and all you hear is two dudes saying things and you're not going to go check, well, I don't know. Fuck, I have no idea. It's just super frustrating. What's up, Warren? So for anyone who's just joining us, I promised I would air this election preview as a watch party. So that's what we're doing. And I've been trying to track some polls during the, as they mentioned them or whatever. And we'll carry on.
New York Times Siena College poll out today shows Biden leading Trump by 3 points in Florida. That's within the margin of error. Other polls are not being so generous to Biden and have it the other way. In fact, tomorrow, President Obama returns to South Florida to campaign for Joe Biden.
Thank you.
For more tonight, our veteran NBC News correspondent, Kerry Sanders, who's been talking to voters down in Florida. Hey, Kerry.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, the average of polls is a strong 2.2. But again, that's still within the margin of error. So
they do mail-in ballots and probably dropping them off because at this point, using the mail is not a good thing. Florida, of course, is a prize, 29 electoral votes. And the voting group that gets the most attention are the senior vote here in the state. Take a look at this. I think you'd expect to see this in Florida. There they are, Trump supporters. There was a lot of support among the senior vote in 2016 that pushed President Trump into office. Now, take a look at this. This was the surprise, seeing folks out there, seniors also parading, but for Biden. That had not happened in this area here. This is in the Villages, sort of ground zero for Donald Trump. We had a chance to talk to some of the voters there. In fact, some of the voters who supported Donald Trump in 2016. Who's registered as a Republican?
I'm a lifetime Republican, but most of my life.
I'm a registered independent, and I've been an independent for 10 years.
Show of hands. Who voted for Trump in the last election? Who is voting for Trump in this upcoming election? Nobody. Why?
I'd put it simply, I want our democracy back.
I cannot vote for a man I do not trust. I cannot vote for a man who I look at to be the great divider rather than the great unifier.
I'm not voting for Mr. Trump because I feel that he is a liar. He perpetuates hate. His whole platform is divide and conquer. And I gave him a chance. And I feel that we need somebody else.
The Florida voters have turned out in record numbers to vote. 62% of registered voters in Florida have already voted, and that was before today's numbers, which they're still calculating. But in that critical group of 65 years or older, 71% of that group have already voted. And of course, when we're looking at the breakdown of those older voters in Florida, as you zero in here and take a look at that NPA, no party affiliation, 18%. So while we did hear those Republicans, independents say that they're switching their allegiances, that no party affiliation is likely, Brian, to be the real vote that determines who takes Florida.
One of the many reasons Tuesday night's going to be so interesting. Kerry Sanders down in Tampa. Kerry, thanks.
Joining us now is Mark Caputo, reporter with Politico, and Alicia Menendez, host of American Voices here on MSNBC. Mark, let me start with you. I think Florida is sort of the original injury for post-election traumatic stress disorder. The fact that conversation has shifted to Pennsylvania, it strikes me that may be misguided. Florida seems like it's a very tight race right now, too. What is sort of the ground truth in Florida?
Ground truth is that despite the polls showing maybe Biden up by 3 or Trump up by 2, if you average them together, it's probably closer to what the reality is. At least that's what we feel on the ground. Just looks like it's going to be a very tight race. One advantage Florida does have over Pennsylvania is we've had a number of cliffhanger elections going back 20 years to that Bush v. Gore race in 2000. And since then, we've developed a system here where we're able to cast votes early by absentee ballot, the mail, in person, and on election day. And those votes can be tabulated on election day, but sort of logged into the systems ahead of time. So on election night, we are going to have a really good indication of how 75% maybe of the ballots have been cast almost instantaneously. Like about 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to know maybe about 70% of the Florida vote at that time. So we could have an early call, but there's one exception. We have a history of razor-thin election margins. This could always wind up in recount territory, less than half a point. And so then we wouldn't have a call, but we'd still have a pretty good idea of what the state looks like. And because the state resembles so many parts of the nation, it'll give a clue as to how other states might break.
All right, Mark, you first, and then I have a question for Alicia too. But Mark, talk to me about Miami-Dade. I'm hearing a lot of alarm out of friends in South Florida about votes not getting in, about shenanigans in terms of the mail, and that Miami-Dade and Broward are deeply underperforming. So that's my question to you real quick.
Yeah, I don't think Broward is really underperforming for Democrats, but Miami-Dade certainly is. When you look at the statewide turnout margin, or better said, turnout average for Democrats in the state, it was like this morning it was 63%, but in Miami-Dade it was lower than that. And also, even though there are more Democrats than Republicans, Republicans were staying close to Democrats in total early ballots cast because Republicans had such a high turnout rate, relatively speaking, and Democrats had such a low rate. When you're talking about those ballot shenanigans, so to speak, House State Democratic leader Keone McGee had filmed a bunch of ballots, or someone had sent him a video apparently of ballots sitting around in a mail facility. Now the Postal Service is allegedly investigating, the state attorney's office is, and the supervisor of elections wants to make sure.
And really quickly, Alicia, explain to us, because Florida is different from states out west, where it's a very Mexican-American, Central American-based Latino vote. In Florida, it's very Cuban-based, Venezuelan-based. Please explain, for those who are not familiar, why that tends to be so helpful to Republicans.
Right. And don't forget the Puerto Ricans, one of the two largest subgroups within the Latino electorate. I mean, listen, this is just not going to be the same type of race as 2016. Hillary Clinton enjoyed tremendous support from the Hispanic community here. It's likely for Democrats going to be much closer to 2012, when you had Barack Obama getting about 60% of the Latino vote here in the state. He still carried the state. So that's what Democrats are looking at. Why? What happened? Well, 2016, there were Cuban-American Republican voters who were skeptical of Donald Trump. A lot of those voters, Joy, have come home. In addition, the president has been camped out here for the last 4 years. He has made inroads with Venezuelans. He's made overtures to Colombians, to Nicaraguans, all of that coming together on the margins to create a much more dynamic race. You add to that disinformation that we've seen in Spanish language, and it is a complicated picture.
As they say, we'll be talking between now and then. Mark Caputo, political reporter with Politico, and our own Alicia Menendez. Thanks to you both. As we like to say on television, we're just getting started. The second hour of our live coverage starts at the top of the hour after this break.
Oh, I don't know if I can stay up that long. Yep. Yeah, Sylvester said there's more registered Democrats than Republicans in Florida by about 180,000 voters, hoping those Dems turn out this time and vote. You know, I think that's pretty likely. This is the thing, guys. Like, the vibe right now, right? Like the vibe to like going into 2016, as Greg brings up, I started sounding a lot like Dave Myers about 3 days before the election. Like, wait a minute here. We could totally lose. And you know, the polls had gone into they just dipped into the margin of error. And they were trending hard. That was the problem, right? Like the last week they were trending in a particular direction, and they you know, the polls I don't even think caught the last bit of that you know, polling move. This time, you know, the Trump supporters and Trump being a dick, and like, this is a really small number of people. The number of people that worked in 2018, and everyone was like, oh, 2018 is going to be a nail biter. No, it wasn't a fucking nail biter. 2018, we beat the fuck out of the Republicans. We slaughtered them. We gained like 50 seats in the House. That's stupid. And other than Trump actually being on the ballot now, right? And again, next. And I think in some places it actually, you know, it provably is. It's amazing to me, and always will be, that isn't more so, right? But, you know, taking Florida out of the equation, I know it's tough for us because most of us live here. The rest of it, like, looks really good. And the errors that were made in polling in 2016 have largely been corrected. I saw one theory that they've been overcorrected, which is a possibility, but not one that I want to entertain. I don't really know it enough. And it just to me, you know, you can't have a fucking pandemic like this and lie about it constantly and not have it cost you at all, right? We know for a fact it's not going to cost them as much as it should, right? Like, if this was actually a reasonable universe, he would have like 5% support. He would have QAnon people, and that's it. But unfortunately, we live in fucking la la land now, where, you know, you can just lie to people 24 hours a day, and it actually works, and people dig it, which I will never understand. Anyway, Steve Kornacki's data junkiness gives me some solace. There you go. Anyway. So, if you can, I am not a superstitious person in any way, shape, or form. But if you wanted to cross your fingers, write a note to the universe or however you want to do that, and just like, could we please just win Texas? That'd be great. And the Texas House and the Senate. That'd be great. Thanks. Because if we win Texas, Florida can go fuck itself. Like, hard.
Welcome back. It is less than 36 hours until Election Day polls open on Tuesday. This really is the final push in the 2020 election.
Exactly,
breathe,
Rob.
Everybody. Push, breathe. I'm Rachel Maddow, joined here in our New York studio by my colleagues Joy Reid, Nicole Wallace, and our friend Brian Williams is over the river, through the woods, down the hall, and around the corner there, because our studio is big now. President Trump's holding a rally in Georgia at this hour. I believe it's his 4th of 5 rallies in as many states today. He is due to hold still another rally within the next couple of hours in Florida. President Trump tomorrow will be in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. Joe Biden was in Pennsylvania today, and interestingly, he was expected to spend all day in Pennsylvania tomorrow, too. Both Biden and Harris expected to do multiple stops in Pennsylvania tomorrow. But the Biden campaign then added one last-minute trip to a different state, to Ohio. He will be in Cleveland, Ohio tomorrow as well, on top of all those trips to Pennsylvania.
Interesting little change to the schedule, and that kind of last-minute change, like Biden adding an unplanned stop in Ohio tomorrow, that reveals how the campaigns are meeting up at the end of the day, how they see the shape of the race in the final hours. And that's all we have left after all. But what is clear it is that in this election, like every other, it's going to come down to a handful of very close battleground states. NBC News Wall Street Journal poll out today finds Biden with a 10-point lead nationally. As we always counsel people, however, these are state elections. One of the people who conducted that survey, Republican pollster Bill McInturff, says, quote, "This election is probably the most competitive 10-point race I've seen. So where else to go but Steve Kornacki at the big board to explain exactly what that competition looks like writ large. Steve?
Yeah, Brian, that's an interesting way of putting it, because let's take a look here at our road to 270. And again, the battleground states here that you see sort of highlighted, they're all states that Donald Trump won in 2016. They're all states that Trump is in trouble in to some degree right now. And they're all states, we've taken you through some of the polling on this. The polling is close. Whether you're talking about Texas or Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Biden perhaps ahead a little bit more here, significantly more in the Midwest, but Biden's either ahead or close in every single one of the states you see here. And so it raises a possibility. What if Biden just wins them all? I mean, what if he wins Texas by half a point, Arizona by 2, Iowa by a point? What if it all breaks Joe Biden's way? This is what that would look like. And if you've got national polling at 10 points, 9 points, 8 points, somewhere in that range, it is possible. Doesn't have to be a landslide in every state. It's possible the states just all break to Biden. And that's what that looks like. That is the outer edge of the range here of electoral college possibilities. And you can work your way in from there. Let's say it doesn't all break for Biden. Let's say Trump is able to hang on to states like Iowa, like Ohio. This would be sort of a 2008 situation. Remember Barack Obama's 8-point national victory over John McCain? This might be a version of that, where Biden's able to get a Florida, a North Carolina, an Arizona, take those 3 Midwest states. Again, there wouldn't be much of a difference in the national popular vote between that first landslide I showed you and a Biden electoral college victory that looks like this. Nor, by the way, would there be necessarily a huge national popular vote difference between this and, say, something like this? This would be a very narrow Joe Biden victory. This would be Biden getting Wisconsin and Michigan. This would be the big surprise of election night. This would be Trump getting Pennsylvania, where he trails by about 4 or 5 points right now. Otherwise, it would be Trump shoring up those Southeast states and then Biden getting Arizona. Arizona, a state there Democrats very optimistic about, given what happened in 2018, given demographic trends. And again, Democrats getting that congressional district in Omaha. Why do we put so much emphasis on that? Trump only won it by 3. It's got a lot of college-educated voters, white-collar professionals. It's the demographic that has really been moving strongly to Democrats in the Trump era. The polling we've seen come out of there has been very favorable to Democrats. So again, this is a scenario where in the Electoral College, Biden is just squeaking it out. In the national popular vote, he could be significantly ahead in a scenario like this. So that's, I think, what McInturf is getting at when he says that. Nationally, Biden ahead significantly. That could add up to a Biden landslide, frankly. But it wouldn't take much movement in a lot of these states. We're talking 2-3 point movement in a lot of these states to move those electoral college numbers around pretty substantially.
Oof, Steve Kornacki, thank you. Thank you very much. We want to now bring in NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns, who is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with, among other things, the latest on the legal battle over whether there should be the open carrying of firearms at the polls in that state, because that's where we're at as a country. Dasha, what do you got?
Rachel, in these final hours, guns at the polls very much in the spotlight in this open carry state. We are waiting on a last-minute decision from Michigan's Supreme Court. The Secretary of State issued a ban on open carry at the polls, but that was recently struck down by 2 lower courts. Of course, this is a major concern to many voters as they prepare to head to the polls on Tuesday. A recent poll found that 73% of Michiganders do not want to see guns in voting areas, and fueling some of those fears are some of these headlines out of Michigan, from the alleged plot on Governor Whitmer by militia members to the scenes I saw last weekend here as I covered dueling rallies where groups on the left and on the right both came heavily armed. Scenes like that raising stakes, raising concerns. But Rachel, at the end of the day, the folks who are going to be on the front lines of this, they are the local clerks, the precinct chairs, the election workers. I've been talking to those folks and they tell me they're being put in a tough position, still waiting on an answer to this important question that will impact what election day looks like for them. Take a listen to what they have to say on this issue.
It puts us right down to the wire because I don't know how it's going to all play out. And bottom line is, there could be people that come in regardless just to see what they can get away with.
My biggest concern really is that our voters are concerned. I worry about them being intimidated into staying home, like you said, with voter intimidation.
And fanning the flames of this, Rachel, the president's repeated calls for his supporters to go and watch the polls closely, and his repeated attacks on the governor of this state that he very much needs to win. And of course, this is of particular concern to voters of color. A local group called Justice for Black Lives is planning to have a poll buddy program where they have volunteers escorting voters to the polls who need that extra support. And one voter I spoke with, Greg Davis, plans to bring a group of 30 voters together to their local precinct to vote in solidarity. Rachel?
Wow, Dasha, thank you for that reporting. That's fascinating. I mean, the fact that we live in a country where you need to have a poll buddy system because people very well may be terrified by their fellow voters turning up with guns to try to intimidate them from ever turning out. I mean, other countries would write reports about this, right? As this some sort of something that we would never want to emulate in our own country. We used to be the kind of country that would police this around the world. Now it's here at home. There's one Midwestern bellwether county that gets a lot of attention every 4 years, despite it being in a solidly red state. It just happens to have weird predictive powers. It's Indiana's Vigo County. It's a small rural county. It's home to a large student population on Indiana's western border between Indiana and Illinois. Vigo County has the distinction of having sided with the winning presidential candidate in all 16 presidential elections dating back to 1956. It's officially uncanny. The town's roughly 100,000 residents voted for Barack Obama twice in 2008 and 2012. The county then switched to Trump by a 15-point margin 4 years ago. For what it's worth, Emerson College recently did a poll of Vigo County, Indiana, for this year, and what they came up with was that it was a tie, 48-48. Joining us now is someone who knows a lot about Indiana and its politics. He has also been out campaigning for the Biden campaign today, specifically in Michigan. He is the former mayor of South Bend, former presidential candidate, current surrogate for the Biden-Harris ticket, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to have you here.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
How does Vigo County go this year?
I think we'll get it, but it is awful close. I've campaigned in Vigo County back in 2010 when I was running for state treasurer. Didn't win the county, and I didn't win the state. But the remarkable thing right now is that Joe Biden is ahead by so much nationally, but of course it only counts if it comes through in these states that are largely a game of inches. We've got an election to get through these next 48 hours, but afterwards we've got to ask ourselves some serious questions about our democracy, about how that can be true. And, I think it's time for us to look at what it means for our representative republic to be a little more representative.
Mr. Mayor, when you have been out traveling around the country talking to voters on behalf of the Biden-Harris campaign, first of all, we've very much enjoyed all of your appearances on Fox News. But I know you've been doing a lot of national media, local media, but also just talking to people. If there was a thing that you could go back in time now, if you could earn the Biden-Harris campaign an extra week where they could sort of restitch some of the seams and redouble their efforts in some areas or pump up some work that they have only been able to half do thus far, what are those places that you'd go back and urge them to do even more?
Well, again, I think this campaign is ahead for a reason. They've stuck to the issues that really matter most and are affecting people. I think what none of us could have guessed when this campaign began for Joe Biden or when I was running for this nomination is that COVID would come and in some ways change everything, but in many ways just accentuate what we'd already seen, from racial injustice to the crisis of not enough Americans having health care. I'm a big believer that you can't talk enough about the economy. It drives me nuts that even now Donald Trump gets quite a bit or takes quite a bit of credit for the Obama-Biden recovery. And I think that, to his credit, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they've been talking a lot about this. But I would always want us to be talking about it even more, because we can't let them get away with claiming to some kind of economic miracle. Look, they inherited economic growth, slowed it down a little bit. It was actually a manufacturing recession. And I'm talking about pre-COVID. Post-COVID, on track to be the worst jobs president since Herbert Hoover, and we should be driving that home along with the vitally important message that I think Joe Biden is very effectively delivering, that really is what I think helps bring a lot of people over the line, which is, look, whether you're progressive or moderate, independent, or even a Republican who likes to think for yourself, we just need to come together and can't go on with this chaos. A nation divided the way Donald Trump has divided us will not be able to resolve any of our issues: healthcare, climate, racial justice, you name it.
I too, Mayor Pete, I'm a fan of your Fox appearances, and they're purposeful. I mean, and the purpose is to drive this message you're delivering right here. And our colleague Alicia Menendez talked about disinformation that has seeped into the minds of a lot of Florida voters, especially in the Hispanic community. I wonder if you have sort of, if you come back like an explorer and explain to the Biden campaign, here's what has sunk in. I mean, there are viewers over there that actually believe Joe Biden is either a socialist or under the influence of socialists and will become one if elected. How do you, in these closing hours, when all you've got is maybe one hit on a cable channel, one hit on a talk radio show in the targeted county, how do you dispel that in your very expert, skilled way? What do you say?
I think the most important thing is to remind people that we've had decades to get to know Joe Biden. And when you're looking in the eyes of Joe Biden, you are not looking in the eyes of some kind of crazy radical. This is somebody who has made clear what he believes and with whom the American people agree on issue after issue, from the fact that the wealthy and corporations need to pay their fair share to the idea of expanding, not taking away health care. Now, let's remember that, even the word socialism, which I think has very little power over people my age or younger. But if you grew up at the knee of a parent who fled something that is not at all what we would recognize as, let's say, European socialism, but something that called itself socialism and was horribly repressive in Latin America, then that word still has an awful lot of power. We've just got to make it clear that this is the recycling of a scare tactic that the right has used against all Democratic candidates, moderate, progressive, and otherwise, for decades. And of course, all those horrible things they say about us never come true.
Yeah. Hey, Mayor Pete. What's a lot of people forget that, the Obama-Biden ticket actually won Indiana, right, in 2008. They won a lot of states that people didn't expect a black candidate to be able to win, but Biden was on that ticket too. Can you talk a little bit about, if Biden is able to prevail, what will we look back and say that he did right in terms specifically of white voters? Because it does feel like we're seeing Biden be able to reproduce what Obama did, which was to win the highest share of white voters, I think, since Jimmy Carter. And that's a combination of, white working class voters, but especially college educated white voters. What is the difference? If he wins, what will he have done right, particularly in your region, in the Midwest?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is tonal. A lot of it is this idea that certainly is strong among a lot of people I know here in Indiana who say, look, I vote for the person. And maybe it turns out they usually vote Republican, but they'll vote for a person who they believe has their best interests at heart. And that just sort of comes across with Joe Biden. He's been very clear on policy, on what he's going to do about healthcare, taxes, the economy, COVID, climate, racial justice, you name it. But we don't get into these policy rabbit holes all the time because he spends a lot of his energy talking about things like the soul of the nation, right? The idea that the presidency is not just about policy making, although that's hugely important. It's not just about management, although we know we need more competent management of things like the crisis than we get out of this White House. But it's about even more than that. It's about what you can do out of that highest office in the land to call people to their highest values. And I think he understands that. The other thing I think he understands that serves him well is that the working class is multiracial. So his ability to connect with white working class voters, talking about things like his experiences growing up in Scranton, does not come at the expense of his credibility with black voters, which, after all, is a huge part of how he won the Democratic nomination. And thinking about how he has unified those messages in his campaign, I think prefigures how his presidency will be positioned to do what obviously will be an urgent order of business, which is unifying the nation as we continue to face this reckoning over racial injustice.
Former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, former 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg. It's great to have you here, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for taking time.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
All right. It is not just the race at the top of the ticket with the potential to change the landscape of this country and indeed the globe. There's also really important Senate races all over the country, and a whole bunch of them are locked in a statistical dead heat. The Senate absolutely could flip to the Democrats, or it couldn't, which will have a very big impact on what the next president is able to do, no matter who it is. We've got expert help on the way in terms of control of the Senate. Stay with us.
The Senate would be nice. Speaking of which, I think that I'm pretty sure we're gonna get Arizona, which is fun. Senate race. Excuse me. Just want to check in on that. See how that is going. Oh man, okay. +2 for Kelly, +7 for Kelly, +6, +8, +4. I mean, that's a pretty steady outside the margin average. Cool. I mean, he's a fucking astronaut and she's a loser. So what are you gonna do? Yeah, that Atlas guy is a freaking piece of work. Whew. Not very cool. South Carolina again is a dead heat. I think North Carolina, and this might end up having an effect on the race overall as well. We've been doing relatively well there. Yeah, it looks like an average of like +6, maybe +5. There's been some polls that just came in yesterday. A few of them, and their A+ polls had them up 10. So that's a whole thing. That looks like an outlier though. So I think we probably see like 5 or 6 in North Carolina. And it'd be weird to have people voting for Cunningham and not voting straight blue ticket. I mean, statistically, there at least is going to be a little bit of it. Yeah, Jeannie, I got to go to sleep too. That's a good idea. Guys, you guys are fantastic. Thanks for hanging out with me. I will be, back tomorrow for the show. Obviously, if any new data comes in, we'll share that with you guys. And I guess I'm the guy who has to say it now. Sasquatch as a mythological construct is real. And then the button didn't work. So I guess I just have to say it. Sasquatch is just